money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com on a Monday, starting a brand new week. We'll be taking your calls, 855-4-SCHIFF. That's 855-4-SCHIFF if you want to get in on the program. First of all, let's take a look at what's happening in the markets today. Again, we've gotten off to a very volatile start earlier, just before the show began. In fact, I think even, 10 minutes ago, the Dow was down about 100 points. It's now down only 24, so it's cut its losses by three-quarters. The only thing that's happened is we got the ISM, I think it was the manufacturing numbers that came out this morning that were not as bad as people had been thinking. That might have given a boost to the market. Also, the prices paid component was quite a bit hotter than had been forecasting. Again, the prices paid component is a reflection of inflation that has been created that is driving prices higher. Nonetheless, the markets are responding positively. Gold was up right out of the gate. In fact, it's gaining more ground now. I'm looking at the ETF GLD is up the equivalent of about $33. It, too, has gained maybe about $8 or so in the last 8 minutes since the ISM numbers were released. Silver is up about $1, and gold stocks are very strong. I mean, the Huey Index is up right now 2.4%. Gold stocks considerably outperforming the general stock market in the third quarter that just ended. In fact, the gold stocks actually eked out a 1 percentage point gain in the third quarter. Wasn't as good as the 8% gain that gold had. Remember, on Friday, I wasn't sure. I mentioned how gold did for the third quarter until I went back and took a look and saw that gold, in fact, rose by 8% during that third quarter, which was another stellar performance for the yellow metal. In fact, if you look at the Dow ratio expressed in gold, the stock market, the Dow, it only lost about 13% or 12% in, I think, in terms of dollars, but it was down almost 20% in terms of gold and the gold Dow ratio closed sub 7, meaning the Dow Jones is worth less than 7 ounces of gold. And in fact, now the Dow is up 10 points. We've had over a 100-point rally in about the last 10 minutes. Obviously, the markets liked that number. The dollar is, again, moving in the opposite direction. The dollar index made a new 52-week high earlier this morning. I can see now that the dollar is losing steam as fast as the stock market is gaining it. You know, that relationship is likely to continue, and it really shows you how the overvalued dollar potentially is part of the problem facing the global economy. I don't think the global economy can ever fully recover as long as the dollar is so artificially overvalued. I mean, that is a major problem that is preventing the decoupling from really taking hold, because as long as the dollar stays overvalued by speculators and central banks who are buying it despite the bad fundamentals, we will continue to deprive the world of purchasing power as we transfer it to Americans. But the problem with Americans is they're so loaded up with debt that even though the dollar is being artificially propped up, they're not going to be spending that money. We're spending it on government and things like that. So the global economy is really going to have a harder time recovering. But anytime it does, anytime you're going to see strength in stock markets, economic good news, you're seeing the dollar tank. The only time the dollar can seem to rally is if there's bad news. And so people are buying the dollar as a safe haven from bad news, irrespective of the fact that there's no real safety in the dollar. I mean, the dollar is being bought on the perception of quality, even though the reality is the exact opposite of perception. Of course, that's also the same thing is happening in the Treasury market. We're continuing to see yields moving back down. The yield on the 30-year now well below 3% again at 2.85. The yield on the 10-year at 1.875. Ridiculously low yields. No, I was watching this morning on CNBC, Fed President Fisher, I think he's of the St. Louis Federal Reserve, was on CNBC, talking about the Fed. And while, not everything he said was completely outrageous, he did mention that he thought that the Federal Reserve was creating a moral hazard, although he certainly understated the degree to which this is true, by enabling the government to continue to spend and rely on the Fed to try to stimulate the economy. Joe Kernan, who was interviewing him, kept bringing up, what about your dual mandate? I mean, why isn't the Fed being more aggressive, given how high unemployment is? And, the reality is there is nothing the Fed can do to create jobs. There's nothing the Fed can do to reduce the rate of unemployment. I think in the past, there was a relationship between printing money and unemployment, which served the basis of the Phillips curve. But the reason that printing money in the past was able to bring down the unemployment rate was because printing money lowered wages. And it was lower wages that increased demand for labor, not the fact that the Fed was easy. There certainly were better ways to reduce wages, but since governments often erected barriers to prevent wages from falling, such as a minimum wage law, or maybe there was a union contract in there, a way to bring wages down despite these laws or contracts was to create a lot of inflation, and that's in fact what happened. So it's the lowering of wages that is responsible for increased demand for labor, not the inflation itself, but the consequence. And of course, there are better ways to bring about lower wages than destroying the value of money. But the problem today is that wages overall are a relatively small part of the labor cost. A bigger problem, I think, is regulation and taxes, and there, government keeps piling on new regulations and taxes faster than the Fed can reduce wages by creating inflation. Plus, also when you create inflation, that's putting upward pressure on raw materials, on imported components. We certainly import a lot more components today than we did in the past, and so you're not getting as big a reaction from lower wages because employment costs are not, in fact, going down. And, when you have people out there who can just live on extended unemployment benefits, a lot of the lower wage jobs are just not going to be taken because Americans would just assume collect the extended unemployment benefits. So the policy is not going to work. And, in fact, it is backfiring on the Fed. Because the Fed is printing all this money, because the Fed is buying all these government bonds, the federal government itself is off the hook in the short run. It is spared having to make the tough choices that would actually create the jobs and grow the economy. The government doesn't have to cut spending because the Fed is there loaning the money at cheap rates. If the Fed was out of the equation, if the Fed let interest rates rise, then financing these big debts would be impossible, and so the government would be forced to reduce spending instead, and then we actually may have some gains in employment. And of course, if they started to abolish a lot of these regulations, that would help even more. But instead, the government relies on the Federal Reserve. The government counts on the Fed to stimulate the economy with cheap money and low interest rates, and so the economy never gets better. The government keeps on destroying it because the Fed keeps on giving it the rope, which unfortunately it uses to hang the American economy and the American worker. Anyway, we will come back. We got a break here. Hey, the lines are open, 855-4-SCHIFF if you want to call. The problem we've had the last few shows is people wait till the last segment to call, and now they don't have any time. So if you want to call in, now's the time to do it. 855-4-SCHIFF. We will be right back. This is Peter Schiff at SchiffRadio.com. Got a full board of phone calls, so I'm going to take some calls, and then I guess at the top of the next segment, I got some really funny sound that I want to play from ABC when they convened a bunch of second to fourth graders and asked them some advice on how to improve the economy. So you don't want to miss that. Anyway, but now let me take a few phone calls. Up first is going to be Alex calling from Fort Lee, New Jersey. Alex, welcome.
Hey, thanks. I wanted to ask two quick questions. The first one is, I'm studying economics now in school, and they keep talking about how as the economy grows, there's more money chasing the same goods and there's inflation. Is that just total nonsense?
It is. As the economy grows, you have more goods, and so prices come down. It's the money supply growing that causes prices to go up. The money supply doesn't have to grow. That's something that the government chooses. So it's not the growing economy that produces the inflation. That's what the politicians want you to believe, because they want to take the focus off themselves. What causes the prices to go up is that money printing, and that prices that would have gone down because the economy was growing end up going up instead because the money supply grows faster.
Okay, cool. And the last point was, what do you respond to people that say that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and inequality and all that?
Well, I mean, I agree. I mean, some of the rich are getting richer, not all the rich. I mean, some of the rich are getting poorer. It depends on how they make their money. But yes, there are rich people who are getting richer and poor people who are getting poorer. But that's not because of capitalism. See, that's my beef with Michael Moore. It's government central planning, central banking, it's fascism, statism, corporatism, crony capitalism, however you want to define it. These are the things that are responsible for that growing dichotomy. And so if we try to correct the problem with even more government, we're just going to exacerbate the problem. So if we really want to lift all boats, if we really want to improve the living standards of the poor and the middle class, the best way to do that is for government to get out of the way, for the government to stop, to allow market forces to operate unfettered, and to get rid of all these subsidies for Wall Street and all the cheap money and the banking sector and everything that they are doing that is basically responsible for this big shift of wealth towards a few people at the top. This is not some natural consequence of capitalism. Yes, under capitalism, the rich will get richer, but so will the poor. So will the middle class. In fact, the biggest beneficiaries of capitalism are the poor. They're the ones that have the most to gain. If you go back in time, the rich have always had a pretty good life. I mean, certainly relative to poor people. But, back in the olden days, if you were rich, you can always have music in your house because you can hire musicians to come and play for you. The poor people couldn't do that. But as capitalism produced the phonograph, the poorest people now can enjoy the equivalent of an orchestra in their own house now with an iPod. That's a function of capitalism. Capitalism is what brought music to the masses. It used to just be enjoyed, by kings and people who could really afford to pay these musicians to come to their house and play for them. And you can look at all these things. I mean, the rich never had, the super rich, they had workers that could do their dishes and that can do their laundry, so they didn't have to do it by themselves. But when we have dishwashers and washer dryers, it's the poor people who benefit the most from not having to do those jobs, because the super rich never had to do them because they paid people to do it. So the big increase in living standards from capitalism flows most disproportionately to the poor. In fact, that's what abolishes poverty, is the wealth that's created by capitalism. So we have to go back towards that model and move away from what we have today, which unfortunately gives capitalism a bad name and makes it a lot easier for guys like Michael Moore to discredit it.
I see. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks for the call. Next up is Meek calling from Tokyo, Japan. Meek, welcome to the show.
Actually, it's Nick. Peter, how are you?
I'm good. So are you an Aussie living in Japan?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Hey, I was just trolling over the YouTube, and I found a discussion between a couple of people. One person asking some guy who wanted to up the taxes on the rich or richer people, and the other guy saying, well, it's the regulations is what's is basically what's killing the economy. And his comment was basically, the guy who wanted to increase the taxes was, what regulations, trim what government programs, be very specific, because every time a conservative says those things, it is pro-business and it hurts the poor. If you advocate those things, we will have a problem. A strong middle class and a strong labour is what we need. The wealthy is what we need to trim a lot. Yeah. They stole from the U.S. to get that wealth. Time to take it back.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's just
how do you
look? It's just pure, unadulterated. Yeah, it's just propaganda. I've pointed this out many, many times. But if you take the Ford workers from 1914, 1915, when Henry Ford introduced his $5 a day wage. There were no labor unions and there were no minimum wage laws. Henry Ford basically paid whatever he felt like based on the market for workers, and Ford workers were paid $5 a day, which is the equivalent on a weekly basis of 1.25 ounces of gold. If you take what Ford workers make today, they make about $250 a day, and by the time they pay taxes, if you take maybe 25% out for payroll taxes and income taxes, because the Ford workers paid no income taxes or payroll taxes back then, you'll see that Ford workers today only earn about 1/2 ounce of gold per week. So the Ford worker in 1914 earns 150% more in real terms, in real buying power, than the Ford workers do today. And that of course now the Ford workers have the benefit of all these special government protections, but obviously they've backfired, because workers are earning a lot less today with all these protections than they were a long time ago without them. And the problem is the regulations have destroyed the productivity of labor, and therefore the wages have to come down to reflect the lower productivity. 100 years ago, when we didn't have all these rules and regulations, labor productivity was higher, or could be higher, and so the gains accrued to the workers in a free market where there was competition for labor. And as far as what rules and regulations, there are so many that can be repealed. I just heard even on television this morning, they were estimating the annual cost to businesses to comply with government regulations at $1.5 trillion per year. I mean, that is an enormous cost, and it's probably even more than that. So there are so many rules and regulations. I mean, think about all the regulations that have been written in the last 10 years alone. I mean, why don't we just get rid of those? It's not like the country was falling apart without those regulations. I mean, we keep writing more and more regulations and never repeal any of the regulations that were written in the past. So they just go on top of each other, and the burden gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and companies can't bear it. Especially, many of the regulations are specifically there to punish employers who hire people, to make the hiring process that much more expensive and that much more risky. It's no doubt that so few people want to hire. But anyway, hey, thanks for your call. Thanks for listening. We will be right back. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com. And this is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. And I want to take a break from the phone calls and play a little sound. I don't know if anybody happened to catch this on ABC. It was on Friday morning with Chris Cuomo, who basically convened a group of second graders. I guess they're about 7-year-old kids, and wanted to ask them what their advice would be on how to improve the economy. Now, why you would want to ask seventh graders for economic advice is a whole other story. Although, as I'm listening to these kids, it occurred to me that maybe ABC isn't the first organization to think about asking 7-year-olds how to handle the economy. I think maybe President Obama's entire economic plan was the brainchild of this 7-year-old kids in this in second grade. Maybe it was a class project, And so as you're listening to these little kids speak, just imagine that you're hearing President Obama and his cabinet, because this pretty much sums up about the understanding of economics. I think maybe the typical cabinet head in the Obama administration, certainly the members of his economic team, have no better understanding of economics than these 7-year-olds in this ABC clip. But first, let's actually play some of the advice that they have that unfortunately President Obama has been following. First one is going to start with a little girl. Very, very, it doesn't even do it justice. You got to find this thing on YouTube because these kids are really, really cute. So one of them, there's a discussion with a little girl who wants to be president herself one day. And here are the questions that she's asked. This is cut number 5.
Why should I vote for you?
I'll ask the rich people to give some of the money to the government, and ask the government to give the people who really need the money.
Who's voting for Kanine for president when she grows up? Oh, yeah? Okay,
Everybody
I represent the rich people now. I don't want to give any more money.
Well, then you're greedy.
Oh, I'm greedy?
No offense.
Okay, so there you have it. This is take money from the rich people and give it to the poor people. Isn't that what we're doing? Isn't that Obama's idea? I mean, do we really need somebody to be president? We can just add, I mean, any seven-year-old kid, sure, take money from the rich, give it to the poor. If they don't want to give it, they're greedy. Yeah, but you know what? It wouldn't be so funny. This is our plan. This is the president's plan. Tax the rich and give it to the poor. Hey, a 7-year-old could come up with something like that. In fact, she did. And maybe it was a 7-year-old. Maybe what's happening is President Obama is getting his economic advice from his 2 daughters. Maybe that's where the whole plan is coming from. Who knows? But anyway, so tax the rich, give the money to the poor. Okay, that's one of the ideas. So let's play a little bit more. Here's some more ideas on how we can get America back. Here, cut number 6.
How do we bring America back?
It could be kind of better if there's more things made in the U.S. so that when we look at this thing where it says it's made, that we could actually be kind of happier that it's made in the U.S.
I like that. That's good.
We could pay more instead of paying the minimum wage. Save more money.
Save more money. Who knows what a tax is? You're going to know even better when you get older, let me tell you that.
Now, you know, a couple of these kids actually prove that they know more than President Obama. One kid wants us to save more money. Hey, that'd be a good idea if we could save more money. Unfortunately, President Obama is trying to prevent us from saving more. One of the kids said that we need to make more stuff here, which is true. We do need to make more stuff here. So maybe I gotta take it back. I think maybe the president is getting his advice from 5-year-olds, because some of these 7-year-olds are obviously smarter than the people in Obama's cabinet. But one of the kids actually might have been from Obama's cabinet. He was snuck in there because his idea was that we pay more than a minimum wage. So in other words, we have too many people that don't have jobs, and so we should increase wages. Well, of course, that's going to backfire. It sounds great, right? Let's pay people more. But if you pay people more, then you're going to hire fewer people. And so increase in minimum wage law is not a good thing to do, although it is something that Congress continues to advocate. I'm sure the president is in favor. But here's where it gets a little funnier here. Let's play cut number 7.
If you have a cookie and I ask you for half the cookie, how do you feel?
I'm fine with that because I get the other half.
Don't you usually say, like, you can have a bite?
No, I don't do that. If it's twice the size of a regular cookie and you break it in half, it's the size of a regular cookie, so you give one cookie.
That is a genius idea. Here's why. If you have more of things, people are more willing to share. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So then the question becomes, how do we make more money, more things in the United States so we have more to share?
Yeah, but the problem is they're trying to imply that if the government takes half of what you earn, if they take half of your cookie, somehow you're going to be incentivized to bake more cookies. That's not how to grow the economic pie. He's got it half right. We do want to grow the pie, but we don't grow the pie by having the government slice it in half and take it away from the people who are baking it and giving it to the people who are not. That is not the way to. But here's the real gem. Here's the funniest stuff from this whole thing. And when you're listening to these little kids, I mean, really think about President Obama's cabinet and just really put their faces on these kids. And this is exactly the kind of stuff that they're talking about right now in Washington. Here, cut number 8.
What can we make here?
Pants that glow in the dark.
Glow in the dark pants. That's what I'm talking about. What else can we make?
You can put money in a printer, then you can print it, then it'll make more money.
That's called counterfeiting, and you go to jail for the rest of your life if you do that.
That's illegal.
That's illegal.
What about money machine?
Or like a tree that makes money.
Okay.
My wife believes I have one of those in my backyard.
You do?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Awesome.
Yes. Matthew.
We can make a rocket skateboard.
A rocket skateboard.
Yeah, two rockets on the side and you hit a button and you do zoom.
Yep. That's his cabinet. I mean, think about when they came up with the idea to subsidize Solyndra and their solar panels. I mean, yeah, I mean, what they might as well be subsidizing a company that makes glow-in-the-dark pants. You know, these are these bureaucrats sitting around thinking up, hey, what can we make? Yeah, glow-in-the-dark pants. Hey, it might not even be a joke. One day we might find out that we are subsidizing a company that wants to make glow-in-the-dark pants. Or what about rocket-propelled skateboards? Although, there might be some kind of problems there with the EPA, or not the EPA, or the OSHA or something. There could be a lot of litigation and safety concerns over rocket-propelled skateboards. But this is what politicians are sitting around doing, trying to come up with ideas. The market needs to come up with ideas. I mean, maybe we need glow-in-the-dark pants and maybe we don't. But it's not up to the government to decide. It's up to the market to decide if there's demand for glow-in-the-dark pants, if people actually want their pants to glow in the dark and they're willing to pay for them. But probably some of the funniest stuff has to do with the kids that say, hey, let's just print money. We need more money. Let's just print up a bunch of money. Isn't that our plan? Isn't that what we're doing? Isn't that quantitative easing? Now, I don't know why the host said that that's counterfeiting. I guess it's counterfeiting when individuals do it, but why isn't it counterfeiting when the Federal Reserve does it? Because I think that's what the kids were saying. We need more money. We need a money tree. We need a money machine. We don't need a money machine. We got Ben Bernanke. He's the money machine. So in other words, what do the kids want to do? The kids want to print money. They want to take money from the rich. They want to give it to the poor. And they want the government to try to figure out what we should be making here, and then I guess subsidize the things that the government thinks that we need, like glow-in-the-dark pants or rocket-propelled skateboards. In other words, President Obama's entire economic plan can basically be summed up by these second graders, by these 7-year-olds. Now, what does that tell you? If the president can't come up with anything more ingenuitive than what 7-year-old kids can do, I mean, first of all, what is that telling you about our whole education system? Do we really need to keep kids in school past the second grade? I mean, why don't they just give some of these kids Nobel Prizes in economics? I mean, they know about the same amount of economics as Paul Krugman. I mean, why do we need to waste all this money sending kids through elementary school and junior high school and college? I mean, they know it all right there at 7th grade. I mean, President Obama, Geithner, his whole team, the guys at the Fed, they have learned nothing more than these 7th graders. I mean, don't we have to look at this and put it in perspective? How can this be the answer? How can this be the answer if a 7-year-old can think of it? There's a reason that we don't let kids vote. Maybe we should, right? Maybe look at these kids, say, hey, why don't we lower the voting age down to 7 years old? Obviously, these kids know plenty. They know enough to vote. If some politician is going to promise to print money and dole it out, drop it from a money machine, they'll vote for him. If a politician wants to promise glow-in-the-dark pants, take money from the rich, give it to the poor, these little kids are going to vote right for him. I mean, the whole thing is that we have to understand that what's obvious to a 7th grader isn't true, right? A 7th grader thinks in terms of people don't have enough money. Let's give them money. Right? He doesn't know. Like my father often reminds me of a story that when I was a kid and I asked him if he could buy me something and I wanted something and my father said, well, I don't have the money. Things cost money. I just can't buy you anything you want. And I said to my father, I said, well, why don't you just go to the office and get some money? Little kids have no perception of where money comes from. Parents have to teach them. The problem is nobody taught President Obama. Nobody taught his cabinet. They've never grown up. They are still economic children. And children are making our economic policy. Children are running this country because they're just talking about what sounds good on the surface. Right? They don't understand the consequences, just like little children. Little children, yes, they'd eat nothing but cookies and ice cream, but they don't understand the consequence of a bad diet. So somebody needs to come into Washington, D.C. and explain the consequences of this childish economic platform and behavior to the people in Washington. There's got to be an adult. Someone's got to be a grown-up and say, hey, there is no free lunch. Here's how economics work, right? It's not just about intentions. It's not about just having good intentions. All these little kids have good intentions. They know in their hearts they want things to be better. They don't understand the consequences of the things that they're saying. And neither does Obama. Neither do most people in Washington because they have the economic intelligence of a 7-year-old. And that needs to end. Anyway, we will be back and take more of your questions. This is the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com. And this is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com. And I'm going to go back to the phones. On hold is Roger calling from Western Tennessee. Roger, welcome to the show.
Hi, Peter. Like your show.
Thank you.
I think some of these guys in the administration, I know I hear you talk about people that shouldn't have went to college. Maybe some of these guys wasted their college education and maybe even their high school education, because I know what I learned in high school economics doesn't really fit what's going on in the administration.
Yeah, well, it seems like the people who are advising the president haven't learned anything since the second grade, because their economic policies are stuck in the seventh grade. I think if people on the Nobel Prize Committee get a hold of some of that sound from ABC, I think we know who the next winners are going to be.
Well, if they don't come out of the Obama administration, maybe some of the second graders will win. But my question was, I was wondering your opinion. We were talking about precious metals, me and my family, the other night, and I'm of the opinion that you really can't go wrong because, even if the price drops and you sell at this lower price, because the dollar revalues, you're getting paid back with revalued dollars that have more purchasing power. So I don't really see how you can go wrong. Is that a wrong opinion of mine or what?
Well, I mean, I understand what you're saying. Right now, if somebody were to sell their gold today, even though they would get fewer dollars than they might have got a couple of weeks ago, that those dollars themselves are more valuable. I think they're only more valuable in terms of other fiat currencies. I don't know that they're any more valuable in terms of other things that you might want to buy. I think they're more valuable in terms of oil. So in some ways I see your point, but ultimately it's my expectation that this dynamic where the dollar is rising on the fear trade. See, right now, a lot of the things that I'm saying economically are coming true. But what's happening is people are buying the dollar as a result of all this bad news. Ultimately, I believe that they're going to dump the dollar as a result of all this bad news. But for now, that's not happening. All the bad things are happening, yet people are buying dollars, not selling them. And ultimately, I think that is going to happen, and that's when I think it's going to be the most important for Americans to have owned gold.
I buy and sell coins quite a bit, and I have people come to me who've held on to silver since 79 or 80, and I often wondered why they didn't sell at the lower price and just go ahead and take the dollars and then buy back in at a lower price.
Yeah, I don't know how many people are still holding silver from the spike in 1980 at $50. There's not that many people that would have bought it that high. I'd say the majority of people who might have bought in that bull market, if they paid high prices, it might have been 15, 20, 25. There wasn't a lot of time where silver was, north of that $20 level. It was just very, very brief spike. But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking a lot of the people who were in the precious metals market in the 1970s, hopefully they got into the stock market and maybe even the bond market in the early 1980s and stayed in those markets, for most of the next 2 decades, and then began making the move back into precious metals once it was clear that the stock market had peaked back in 2000 and things like that. But anyway, hey, thank you for your call. Hey, I got some pretty funny sound, too, I wanted to play. This one is from Russia Today, and it's actress Roseanne Bar, again, chiming in to say we need to tax the rich. Of course, all these celebrities who are wanting to tax the rich, of course, nobody ever seems to point out that they're all pretty rich themselves. But anyway, let's play some of this sound. Here, cut number 1.
You said, Roseanne Barr, if corporations are people, then Goldman Sachs needs to be executed for premeditated mass murder, terrorism, mayhem, and grand larceny.
Yes, absolutely.
Would this be your platform then, running for president?
It's part of it. The part of my platform is, of course, that the guilty must be punished, and that we can no longer, let our children see their guilty leaders getting away with murder. Because it teaches children that, they don't have to have any morals, and as long as they have guns and are bullies, that they'll win, and I don't think that's a good message. I do say that I am for the return of the guillotine, and that is for the worst of the guilty.
So who exactly are the guilty? The rich people? They're guilty for making a lot of money? Is that, or is it just the people on Wall Street who are guilty? I mean, should the guillotine be used for any of the politicians that were instrumental in the financial crisis, that were far more instrumental than any of the people who worked on Wall Street? I mean, should the guillotine be used for the Chris Dodds, the Barney Franks of the world? What about Alan Greenspan? Should he escape the guillotine? But anyway, she actually goes in and and qualifies this more, because it seems it's not just corporations that she wants to, execute metaphorically. She actually wants to execute rich people who don't want to pay higher taxes. Here, cut number 2.
I first would allow the guilty bankers to pay, the ability to pay back anything over $100 million personal wealth, because I believe in a maximum wage of $100 million. And if they're unable to live on that amount, then they should, go to the re-education camps, and if that doesn't help, then be beheaded.
So in other words, if they don't agree to surrender all of their wealth that exceeds $100 million, we should just chop off their heads. Now, first of all, why is it that, so Roseanne Barr wants to say that nobody should be able to make more than $100 million. That should be the maximum income anyone can make. Now, I wonder why she chooses $100 million. I guess it's because that's somewhat above what she earns. I'm sure that she has a pretty high income. I'm sure there are a lot of people that earn a lot less than Roseanne Barr that probably think that nobody could possibly need all that money. I mean, why not make the minimum $1 million a year? Maybe Roseanne Barr earns more than that. And to somebody who's working for minimum wage, somebody earning $1 million a year is probably even richer than somebody who earns $100 million a year compared to Roseanne Barr. So why not cap it down there? But, of course, she doesn't want the cap to affect her. She just wants it to affect people who are richer than her. But let's assume that we actually had this maximum tax where the maximum you could make was $100 million a year. Now, and obviously, I mean, it could even be lower than that, presumably. But let's just say it's $100 million, whatever. But so let's assume there is a businessman who is making $200 million a year. And so 6 months into the year, he gets to $100 million. What is he supposed to do? Stop working? Maybe, hey, I'm going to temporarily lay off all my workers because I can't earn any more money, and so we're just going to shut down these factories or shut down this business. We'll all meet back here in 6 months. I mean, what about the implications? Or what about, hey, I've already made my quota. I can't invest in any new startups. I can't make any more loans to any more entrepreneurs. See me next year because I've already earned my quota for the year. I mean, such a policy would destroy the economy, apart from the fact that it's totally unconstitutional and immoral. But anyway, we're running out of time, so I can't keep talking about this subject. But we will be back. We got a guest coming up at the top of the next segment, and then we will be back and take more of your phone calls. This is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard of talk radio.
Stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back. Hour 2 of the Peter Schiff Show is underway. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Joining the show now, Theodore Hadziantic, who is the Pacific Legal Foundation's lead attorney in 3 cases under the Clean Air Act involving challenges to the greenhouse gas regulations of the EPA. He is formerly an environmental regulator, law professor, and private practitioner. He has over 30 years' experience as an environmental lawyer and has handled a wide variety of matters under the Federal Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, Toxic Substance Control Act, National Environmental Policy Act. Look at all these acts. The problem is, are any of these acts actually helping to improve the environment, or is it just destroying the economy with rules and regulations? Anyway, Theodore, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So it sounds like you've had quite a few run-ins with the EPA. And, I think in the most recent presidential debate, Herman Cain threw out the EPA as the agency that he would like to rein in or do away with. I think he cited pending regulations on dust. What is going on in the EPA? I mean, are we actually better off because of the EPA, or are we better off without it?
Well, Peter, I think it's a mixed bag. If you turn the clock back to the 1960s, before environmental regulations were in place, we did have a pretty poor situation in terms of dirty water and foul air, pretty much from coast to coast. And on the one hand, I think it's important to note that the environmental laws have had a very positive impact on cleaning up the water and cleaning up the air.
So would you say that the air is substantially and the water substantially better than it was in 1960, let's say, compared to what might have happened between 1910 and 1960, if you take that 50-year period? I mean, because I'm sure that there were some improvements going on before we had the EPA. So are we actually doing better with the EPA, or are we doing worse than might have been the case without it?
I think I would rephrase the question. Instead of doing better or worse with the EPA, are we better with some of the environmental laws than we would have been without them? And I think that you need to be discriminating. When you're talking about water, the Clean Water Act since 1970 has, I think, been a resounding success in cleaning up the nation's rivers and harbors and shorelines. On the Clean Air Act, it's been a mixed bag, and one of the reasons for that is that the Clean Water Act is based on what's feasible, what can be done, technology-based standards, what technology is available to control pollutants in water. That's one of the reasons the Clean Air Act has been so successful in cleaning up waters. On the other hand, the Clean Air Act has been based ostensibly on science and what should be done. And when I say science, I put that in quotes because the Clean Air Act is based on the precautionary principle. What can we do? How strict can we make the regulations in order to ensure that there's zero impact on human health? And I think that what you see is our air, even though it is measurably better in parts of the country, the Clean Air Act has not been as successful, not nearly as successful as the Clean Water Act.
Couldn't part of the reason for the cleaner water be the absence of factories? You know, the government and the environmental regulation was part of that. We basically shut down most of our factories, and so now we run these huge trade deficits, which are really damaging the economy. But because so much of what we consume is now made in other countries, isn't the fact that the factories are no longer here, maybe that is the reason that we have a lot less pollution, but we are now suffering in another way?
Contributed?
We don't have all the factories that used to be responsible for a lot of the pollution don't exist anymore. It's not like we have factories that are not polluting. We don't have factories at all. They're gone. And so, yes, we have less pollution because we have less production, but that means we have this gigantic economic problem that's about to implode because we've run up trillions in debt because we've destroyed all of our production.
I don't agree that we have factories here that don't pollute, and the reason that our water is cleaner is because all of the production has gone abroad. I don't think that's true. I think if you look at your typical industrial facility that remains in the country, their discharges into water are far better and cleaner now than they had been 40, 50 years ago. And I think that is a result of the way the Clean Air Act was structured. This is not giving kudos to EPA as an administrative agency, but really to the Congress that had the foresight to make a law based on what's possible versus on what we aspire to do. And to me, that's the difference.
Yeah, although I didn't say that all the factories were gone. We still have some, but certainly most of the things that we used to make ourselves, we are now not making them at all. And the pollution, we import all of our clothing pretty much. We import all of the furniture, all the consumer electronics, all the things that we used to make here. So now the pollution to make those things is in China. It's not here anymore because they're not being made here. I'm wondering, what our air and water would be like if we still made all that stuff here. Would it be as much better? But is it possible that we can redress some of the pollution concerns, not with a government agency, but through the free market? Is there a market mechanism, maybe through torts or through legally, that we can try to bring about a better environment? It seems that when we leave it to the government, we create an agency, they end up doing more harm than good.
Well, one of the problems is that EPA has just become this behemoth whose, in my view, whose primary function is not so much the protection of the environment, but the expansion of its own turf. And I think that, someone once said that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think that EPA, which has been given a tremendous amount of power over the environmental regulations, has been corrupted. And it's just this amazingly broad agency that now regulates virtually every aspect of the economy.
Isn't that,
to some extent,
isn't that the very nature, though, of government? Lord Acton's power corrupts, and it's corrupting absolutely. I mean, isn't that why we shouldn't have an EPA? I mean, if we have these regulations at all, shouldn't they be done on a state or a local level where that corruptive nature of power wouldn't be as intoxicating?
I think that's right. That quote from Lord Acton really had a lot of truth and prescience in it, and EPA is a great example of that. Now, whether the solution is to abolish EPA or to rein it in substantially is a different question. And, those kinds of issues are not ones that I deal with on a daily basis. I'm a lawyer, and I've been challenging EPA's regulations for many years, and I've seen just firsthand how those regulations can and are overreaching throughout the panoply of environmental statutes that you mentioned in your introductory
How often are you able
statement.
to successfully challenge those regulations?
It's a very tough nut to crack. I think one of the problems is that the courts are very much in the environmentalist camp.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Anyway, I want to continue with some of those war stories when we come back from the break. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com. Stick around. And this is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com talking about the EPA with environmental litigator Theodore Hanzi-Antic. And Theodore, welcome back.
Thanks, Peter.
And so now, I know you are representing, I don't know if you could talk about your current cases, but certainly you could talk about prior cases, but you're representing companies who are suing the EPA. And, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is, this is a lot of money that companies are being forced to spend on litigation and, of course, even more money to spend complying with a lot of these rules. This is the money that could have been used to make capital investments, to increase production, to hire more workers, to grow the economy. Instead, it's being wasted on regulations and litigation. But can you give me some examples of some of these cases and maybe where you might have been able to actually win one for the good guys, or where the government was able to prevail?
Sure. I think, the most interesting current example is the greenhouse gas regulations that EPA is undertaking. One important thing to keep in mind is that carbon dioxide is the most prevalent greenhouse gas. It's a ubiquitous natural substance that's, essential to life on Earth. And literally, carbon dioxide is everywhere. I mean, you and I individually, Peter, are major sources of carbon dioxide emissions by virtue of the fact that we exhale. Every automobile body shop, paint shop, every neighborhood pizza shop is an emitter of carbon dioxide.
Yes, well, the plants appreciate
EPA, I'm sorry?
I said the plants appreciate it.
They do appreciate it. In December of 2009, EPA made what I consider a pretty incredible finding that carbon dioxide poses a danger to human health and welfare. And it based this finding on what it considered the science of global warming, leading to the conclusion that global warming is caused by man-made emissions of carbon dioxide. And just we filed a lawsuit against EPA for its endangerment finding, basically saying that EPA failed to do two things. Number one, it failed to fully vet the science in the scientific community under peer review principles. And number two, it broke the law by failing to send the endangerment finding to its own Science Advisory Board. There's been a law on the books since 1970 that says any kind of endangerment finding made by EPA needs to first go to the Science Advisory Board. The Science Advisory Board then comments and makes recommendations to the EPA regarding how the regulations should be changed, and then EPA responds to those. Well, EPA missed a step here in these carbon dioxide regulations. They didn't go to the Science Advisory Board. What's interesting is last week, EPA's own Inspector General, EPA's watchdog, if you will, came up with a scathing report essentially criticizing EPA for not going to the Science Advisory Board and not having adequate peer review of its endangerment finding. We're in the midst of litigating that case with briefs going back and forth furiously with the government in the Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia. And we just actually filed a brief Friday night with the court asking the court to take judicial notice of the Inspector General's really scathing report. And one of
to me, I just think, why is it even necessary? Why does if it's so scathing and it's so obvious? I mean, why do we need a lawsuit? Why can't they just admit they made a mistake?
They would not do that. I mean, that's just like asking the Politburo of the former Soviet Union to admit that they made a mistake.
Yeah, but this is not supposed to be the Soviet Union. I mean, it's okay if you get something wrong to acknowledge it. I mean, nobody is perfect. Hey, we made a mistake. Let's fix it. Don't just deny it to the point where it needs to be resolved with costly litigation.
We're absolutely in the same boat there, Peter. And again, it's there was a motto in the old Soviet Union: "We never make mistakes." And unfortunately, I think you could take that motto and apply it to today's EPA.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, with the government, they never get it right. I mean, if they only make mistakes.
Yeah, and the sad part is that the implications of this endangerment finding on the national economy are just, I mean, they're potentially devastating. We're literally talking about your neighborhood pizza shop being regulated for its carbon dioxide emissions from the pizza oven. I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of new air emission permits to emit carbon dioxide, a natural substance. And
right.
It really...
Well, when are they going to get down to causing every American to have a permit for breathing?
Well, exactly. A permit to exhale, or a permit that regulates the timing by which you exhale.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not as if the economy is doing so great as it is that it can afford all these extra burdens. I mean, talk about kicking somebody when they're down. I mean, the administration, they constantly want to make it about jobs and creating jobs. I mean, did the Environmental Protection Agency not get that memo? Do they have no idea that that's like actually a goal?
It certainly is in conflict with the administration's, espoused desire to create jobs. I mean, if anything, this set of regulations is going to destroy jobs. What we're talking about is potentially billions of dollars of negative economic impact, There are regulations now on the books for carbon dioxide emissions over light-duty vehicles, over heavy trucks, and they're coming down the park in virtually every nook and cranny of our economy. And one of the problems is that in promulgating this endangerment finding, EPA broke the law. And, our position is EPA has to follow the law just like the rest of us.
I think there should be at least some kind of cost-benefit analysis that needs to be done of any of these regulations where the EPA needs to prove that any kind of environmental impact that they have is worth the cost I mean, sure, you can clean up some pollution, but at what cost? I mean, you could be talking about what might amount to a mere nuisance, and the cost could be horrific.
That is dead on, Peter. And, just to go back to our earlier part of our discussion, cost-benefit analysis is exactly what the Clean Water Act had required, but exactly what the Clean Air Act fails to require, which is why the Clean Air Act has been such an unmitigated disaster.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, it's a disaster for the country, not just for the air or the water. But, hey, thanks for coming on. Keep on fighting a good fight. Unfortunately, it's a fight that we have to participate in, but we really can't afford it. And either way, we are losing it. Anyway, don't go away. We got another full half hour coming up here on the Peter Schiff Show at SchiffRadio.com. Popularity, and it's pretty bleak for Obama. His satisfaction, only 11% of those polls are satisfied with the way things are going, and only 20% feel that we're headed in the right direction. You can compare that to Bush 43. At this point in his first term, 44% were satisfied. 52% thought we were heading in the right direction. With Clinton, you had 33% satisfaction. 21% thought we were headed in the right direction, kind of about the same as Obama. Bush 41, a little bit better, 35% satisfied, 24% right direction. The best, of course, Ronald Reagan. He was 35% satisfaction, 51% headed in the right direction. Actually, he's not. He's actually not quite as good as Bush 43. But after all, at the time Bush was running, we were still, at that point, the housing prices were still going up. We were fighting the war on terror. It was popular. So he actually was more popular. But go back. I'm looking back all the way back at Jimmy Carter. That's where you have to go to find numbers as low as the president's. In Jimmy Carter's first term, and of course we know he did not win a re-election, satisfaction was 19%. That's actually higher than Obama's 11%. And 16% of the people thought we were going in the right direction, so a little bit worse than Obama's 20%. But the poll numbers are certainly looking bleaker and bleaker, and rightly so, for Obama. Also, I'm reading a news story that was sent to me by one of the listeners to the show, who pointed out to me, and I just found out about this, it happened last week, the federal government is suing, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission is suing an American company, BAE Systems, because they allege that they fired a gentleman because he was too fat. The individual in question weighed 600 pounds, and he was fired from his job. And now because he was fired, the government is now filing a lawsuit. Now, how much is it going to cost this particular company to defend itself against this lawsuit? I mean, potentially they could have just shaken him down and forced them to write a huge check to this overweight individual, which clearly would have been a lot smaller than the checks they're going to be writing to their lawyers. But this is the message that the government is sending to employers. Watch out, because if we don't like your decision to fire somebody, you may face a very expensive lawsuit. I mean, what is that telling people? I mean, if you want an excuse not to hire somebody, hey, here is one. Certainly, I mean, if anybody is overweight, I would find this very troubling because, people are going to be reluctant to hire overweight people. If you can be sued for firing somebody who's obese, hey, what's your best defense? Don't hire anybody who's already obese. Then you don't have to worry about the government suing you because they think that the person you fired was too heavy. Now, I don't know if this guy's weight was a driving factor or even any factor in the decision to fire him. But the problem is the company shouldn't be forced to justify its decision. If the company decides that it no longer needs the services of this individual, that should be the company's call. It's not up to the government to second-guess that decision and then file a lawsuit if it thinks the decision was arrived at for the wrong reason. Obviously, this company is trying to make money. And if the company thought that this 600-pound individual could do the job effectively, then they wouldn't have fired him. I mean, the only reason they would have fired him is because they believe somebody else could do the job better. for less cost or whatever. That's their call to make. I mean, there's no other reason. They didn't fire him just because he was fat. I mean, if he was doing a good job and there was nobody else that was skinny that could do the job as good, he'd still be there. I mean, companies are in business to make money. But the problem is when the government is able to sue you because they can allege something, then, you know, it's stifling to employment. And I'm sure that if weight was a decision in the firing, it was because his weight made him less productive. I mean, that would be the only rationale. Now, what are they saying? Are they saying that even though he is not productive, even though his 600-pound weight is making him less productive, that the company is not allowed to replace him with somebody who weighs less, who can do the job better? Is that what you're saying? You're saying that even if your weight is a detriment to your performance, that employers are not allowed to take that into account. That they have to hire somebody or keep hiring somebody who's overweight, even if it's hurting the bottom line, which of course is ridiculous for the government to say, especially since, you know, a lot of people have control over their weight. I mean, a lot of people don't have to eat as much as they do. I mean, look, I mean, Chris Christie admits that the reason he's overweight is because he eats too much. What if is he going to be able to? Let's say we elected Chris Christie and he did a bad job. Should we be forced to leave him in the White House because he happens to be overweight? Can we not remove him then because they can say, hey, your people aren't voting for me because I'm too heavy? But this whole thing again is nonsense. That this company has to spend this money defending its decisions, and what it does is it tells other employers, hey, don't hire overweight people, or just don't hire people at all, because you are opening yourself up to a lawsuit. So instead of hiring people, outsource to other countries. Maybe hire a temp. Maybe find a way to use a machine, or just don't grow your business. Again, talking about not getting a memo, you know, why is the U.S. government suing employers over their hiring? The fact of the matter is this company is hiring people, and, you know, why should we sue them and make them regret those decisions? Anyway, let me go back to the phones. Next up is Brian calling from Washington. Brian, welcome to the show. Is Brian there? I don't know. We seem to not be having a response from Brian. Let's go to Kyle in Atlanta, Georgia. Kyle, you're on.
Peter, how are you, my friend?
Okay, how are you?
I'm well. I have things I want to mention. First of all, I know this is late, but I wanted to ask you, so do you think the alien invasion that Paul Krugman has forecasted, is that going to be bullish or bearish for gold?
Well, you're talking about a real alien invasion or a simulated alien invasion?
Well, let's see. He didn't specify, did he? So.
Well, it depends on why the aliens are invading us. What if they're invading us to take our gold? Obviously, that'd be pretty bullish for gold, right, if that was their reason for coming here. But, no, I mean, obviously, if we really were invaded by aliens, it's going to be a big negative for the economy, no doubt. And, we'll probably end up printing a lot of money in order to help pay for the massive military buildup. So it probably is bullish for gold, but I'm not really sure anyone's going to care. You know, if we all get vaporized, it might not matter whether we had gold or not.
Yeah. I guess we won't know. We'll have to wait for Paul Krugman's.
I guess we need a failed alien invasion where we can actually repel the invaders. But I'm sure that gold would be more valuable at the end of the war than before. But,
well, look, I had a better idea. Instead of working the alien angle, let's just pretend that someone, say, out in the Middle East has weapons of mass destruction. Let's just have a big buildup.
Yeah, the irony, though, is an alien invasion is probably just as likely as Paul Krugman's economic advice actually working.
Well, there you go. And, I mean, my point that I was making is that, I mean, if that would really work, I mean, wouldn't we have a boom economy right now? I mean, we've had 10 years of massive war.
Well, that's the point. But, of course, the Keynesians argue that the wars haven't been big enough, that's the problem, that we just need a bigger war, and then we'd get the benefit. But, of course, it's nonsense. I mean, we've never had more deficit spending than we do today. Where is all the stimulus? Where is the growth? Where are the jobs that all this Keynesian stimulus is supposed to produce? And I'm not going to buy the fact that there's not enough stimulus. when there's more than ever before, because you can always argue that there's not enough. I mean, because no matter how much we have, you can always say it could have been bigger. At some point, you have to concede that if it was going to work, it would have already worked. You know?
Right. They think there's too much free market. And that's kind of my main question is that I'm calling to kind of talk to you about the Occupy Wall Street crowd and those protests that are going on. I go to a university down here in Atlanta at grad school, and I came up upon a student rally last week, and they were rallying and protesting about the fact that tuition hikes are pretty outrageous, as they are around every university in the nation right now. And I was just talking to them, and I was thinking, oh, great, this is a good idea to kind of inject some information about, the government involvement in student loans and all the government inefficiencies driving up costs. And like all they were protesting about was they thought that college was too much of an industry, that there was too much of a profit motive. They want more government involvement. They want price controls.
Yeah, I mean, then you're going to get college education with the same efficiency as the post office. I mean, it's not like the cost of postage stamps aren't rising when you take the profit out of the post office. I mean, the only way to get to get efficiencies is to have profits. I mean, imagine if we took the profits out of the computer industry, if we took the profits, out of the cell phone industry, even if we took the profits out of the motion picture industry, what would be the quality of the products that would be produced by government bureaucrats, doing it all for the good of the people? I mean, it would be a disaster. I've got a lot of sympathy for the Occupy Wall Street people. The problem is they're occupying the wrong streets. They need to be in Washington, D.C. They need to occupy Congress, occupy the Federal Reserve. I mean, what's happening on Wall Street is simply a byproduct or a consequence of what's happening in Washington. So if they're really upset about some of the things that are going on down on Wall Street, they need to be up on K Street, or they need to be up on Pennsylvania Avenue. That's where they need to be protesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. I'm just worried because.
Yeah, well, anyway, hey, I appreciate your call. Your points are well taken. I don't know if you have another point you want to make. If you want to hold on, we got a break, and we will be back for the final segment of the Peter Schiff Show, so don't go away. And this is Peter Schiff, SchiffRadio.com. The final segment is here, and I'm still talking with Kyle from Atlanta. Kyle, did you want to make a final point?
Well, yeah, just to build upon what you said before the break, it's just distressing to see because as things really break down here in the economy, it's good that these students and these young people are protesting, but like we said, I mean, they just don't understand the problem at all. And, I mean, like, they're protesting. It's good they're out there, but, I mean, they're willing to give up more of their freedoms and more regulation and more of their tax dollars just if they get their free goodies.
Yeah, they don't understand. Unfortunately, their level of understanding is probably still stuck in the second grade, like those kids that we played earlier, because, they're the product of government schools. So what do you expect?
Yeah, that's why we got to get people like you in the Senate, man.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks for calling. Hey, I wanted to play some sound of somebody actually on television making sense for a change. This is a sound clip from Fox News. This is Robert Johnson, who is a self-made, I'm not sure, maybe he's a billionaire or not. I know he's a founder of Black Entertainment Television, so if he's not a billionaire, he's probably pretty close. But anyway, listen to what he had to say about President Obama's class warfare. Here, cut number 3.
Mr. Johnson, is the president playing class warfare?
Well, I think the president has to recalibrate his message. You don't get people to like you by attacking them or demeaning their success. I grew up in a family of 10 kids, first one to go to college, and I've earned my success. I've earned my right to fly private if I choose to do so. And by attacking me is not going to convince me that I should take a bigger hit because I happen to be wealthy. It's the old, I think Ted and Fred and I would both sort of take the old Ethel Merman approach to life. I've tried poor and I've tried rich, and I like rich better.
Absolutely. Rich is always better than being poor, and people should strive for getting wealthy. And, of course, what the president is doing is going to make that road much harder for people who are currently poor to travel down to get rich. He also, I got some more sound from Johnson, some more pretty smart words. This is from an interview on CBS, also from last week, cut number 4.
I liken what's happening in this country to this scenario. Imagine a group of people go to a restaurant and they start eating. Well, they don't have enough money to pay the bill. So when the waiter comes with the bill, they don't want to pay it. They don't want to make the sacrifice of paying. So they keep ordering. And that's what we're doing. We just keep piling on debt and keep piling on costs because we don't want to make the hard choices.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. I wish I'd have thought of it myself because, you know, if you can't pay that restaurant bill and you don't want to admit it, so you just order more stuff, eventually you've got an even bigger bill that you can't pay. And, of course, you know, the restaurant itself is getting into deeper and deeper trouble because the more money these deadbeat customers owe them, the more they're going to lose based on the food and beverages that they've served. And, of course, the waiters, in many respects, are the Chinese and everybody else who's financing all these deficits, and the government is there. And rather than acknowledging that we can't pay our bills, we're just finding ways to go deeper into debt so we don't have to fess up and say that we can pay our bills. Of course, at some point, the people serving us all this food, it's going to have to dawn on them that just maybe, we're going to dine and ditch. Anyway, let me go back to the phones. Next up is Paul in Denver, Colorado. Paul, you're on.
Hi, Peter. Peter, I got a question for you. I've heard you say something to the effect of the politicians don't have the capability of doing the right thing till potentially a crisis is upon us. What makes you think they're going to ever do the right thing?
Because I think a crisis will be upon us. That's the thing. I mean, I think that we will be in a crisis. As bad as things are right now, this ain't the crisis. You know, we will be there, though, when the dollar finally plunges, when bond prices, collapse and interest rates soar. That's when we're going to have a crisis, and that's when we're going to do something about it. Now, until then, I think we'll just, make the problems worse. Now, the question you could ask me is, what makes me think that when we do have the crisis, that we'll do the right thing instead of the wrong thing? I mean, that might be what your question is. Is that it?
Yes, that is my question.
I don't know. I'm just hopeful. That's the optimist in me, thinking that we will be able to do the right thing once we've exhausted every other possibility, and that politicians are not evil, they're not bad, they're just trying to get reelected. And when it becomes obvious that whatever they do, they're not going to get reelected, then maybe they'll finally do the right thing. There is precedent historically for countries doing the right thing. You know, you go back and look at New Zealand, I think it was in the 1980s when they had a real big problem. It was the Labour party, the big government party, that led the reforms under Roger Douglas to really cut back on the size of government. It would have been maybe even difficult for the National Party to have done the same thing, but so it was done by the big government party that had helped ruin the country. They helped repair it, and so I do think when it is darkest. I made the analogy before to a drunk, by the time he's, lying face down in the pavement in his own puke, without a job and without a family, that he finally cleans up his act, admits his problem, and does the right thing. So I think that there is precedent and hope that we will do the right thing. And if we do the right thing, capitalism is a very powerful a substance that if we swallow it, I mean, it's going to have great effects long term, and there is precedent for that as well. So I'm hopeful, but no, it is not by all means guaranteed. I mean, we could make a giant move in the opposite direction. It could end up being the death of American capitalism completely. What's left of it could be snuffed out. We could move in the other direction to a total totalitarian command type economy, which is one of the reasons that, like Ron Paul, I don't want the government building a fence on the Mexican border. Because if we do that, they'll end up using that fence to keep the Americans in rather than keeping the Mexicans out.
And What is your best? Do you really think optimistically that we have a chance of them doing the right thing, or is it realistic?
Yeah, I mean,
that they're going to do the wrong thing and continue to do that.
Yeah, well, otherwise I probably would have already left the country if I thought it was a lost cause, if I thought it was impossible that we would do the right thing. I'd be getting out while the getting's good. But no, I still remain optimistic that the right information is out there. And ultimately, when it all hits the fan and it all collapses, I think we're intelligent enough to figure out why. And to ultimately, finally, do the right thing. And hopefully I'll be instrumental in helping to make sure that we do take the right fork in this road, that we do go back to freedom and not complete the journey to serfdom. Anyway, hey, that's it for the show today. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We will be back again tomorrow for another 2 hours of the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com. Remember, if you miss any of the show, sign up to be a premium member on SchiffRadio.com. You can listen to any show on demand, commercial free. That's it for now. Take care.